Hello, good evening and welcome. OK, Dad's Army. You rang, my lord. Oh, Dr. Beeching. Hello, hello. Heidi hi. Are you being served? And much, much, much more. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. David Croft, OBE.
I was born in Sandbanks, which is near Poole in Dorset, at a very early age. My mum and father were doing rather well at the time, and they built a bungalow on the banks of Poole Harbour, and I was born just this side of the mud.
Brothers and sisters?
I had one brother, Peter. He was also a show business. He did very well as an actor, and then he became a producer and director at Rediffusion.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me a bit about your parents. I mean, I know about them, but to some extent, but the listeners not. Your father. Let's talk about your father for a start.
Well, they were pretty big stars in between, just after the 1418 war, and my father was going just before the 1418 war, actually, and of musicals. My father, Reginald Charland, he was a light baritone with blue eyes and a good smile, and not very steady voice. They worked together until about 1927, and then father went to America, and there he became the Americans' idea of an English gentleman. He was called the Honourable Archibald Chiselbury, and he had a radio show there which he wrote and was starred in about 7:15 at night for 5 years, actually, 5 nights a week. On your sort of game, really.
Right, indeed. And your mum?
Mum was a big star of musicals just after the 1418 war. And she was a big draw in London and around the provinces. And then she went into management. She was probably the only woman that ever went into management and presented her own show in the West End. She had a show called Tulip Time, and then she tried one or two other propositions. So one of the fascinating things of my childhood, actually, was being part of these shows in preparation. And I was there a lot for Tulip Time and other shows that she prepared, and some of them went on, some of them didn't, but it was a wonderful introduction to show business, really.
Did it, I'm bound to ask, did this close connection and affinity with it lead you in that direction? Did they cause the way you went, do you think?
I think it did. I don't think they particularly wanted me to go into show business, but there was no great effort to stop me. But I wanted to be an actor ever since I was 4, I think, really. And I particularly wanted to be an actor, actually. I didn't particularly want to be a producer or a writer. That sort of happened. It became... I had a lot of irons in the fire. I was trying to be a singer, trying to be an actor, and trying to be a writer, trying to be everything. And the writer warmed up, and I became a director and producer, actually, because I fed up with people screwing up my material, which quite frequently happened.
Okay, let's just, before we get to that, let's talk first about your schooling then. Where did you kick off at school and where did you finish off?
I kicked off I went to school at a very late age, actually. I was well into the 7, actually, because I was in Australia in my very, very early youth, and my mum didn't want me to pick up an Australian accent, so I didn't go to school until I was well...
You'd have made a fortune now in all these soaps.
Oh, of course I would. It would never stop. And I went to a place on Arnold House, which is a very fashionable school in St John's Wood. And after that I went to Dalston Court, which is in Swanage. A very cold, windy place, but very good school, actually. It was run by a chum of my father's, actually. They sort of shared a tent in the 1418 war. And after that I went to rugby. Not for very long, because the money ran out. So I left when I was 15 and a half.
What did you think to public school?
Oh, it's very good, as far as I was concerned. Excellent. There was very benign sort of atmosphere. There was every facility you could possibly want to educate yourself. I didn't take advantage of many of them, but because I just wanted to go into show business all the time, really.
Mm-hmm. So you left at 15 and a half. So what path did you go down then? Proceed from there, if you can.
Well, I hadn't actually got any O-levels as they are now. I didn't want to get them, and it wasn't quite as vital as it is these days. And so I was then started to... I went to Pitman's, learned shorthand and typing. It was quite useful. I learned dancing. I took writing lessons. Just sort of generally hung about, really. And finally, I was trying to get myself a job, really. I think the nearest thing I got was I managed to get into Oh Goodbye Mr. Chips. I played the butcher boy.
Now, okay, we've got to follow this. So how do you get into Goodbye Mr. Chips?
Well, there was a very good agent called Harry Ham who worked for Warren, Selznick and Joyce, and he was a pretty big deal, and so I got the introduction and went up to see the producer and the director of it, and I suppose I looked. It was a very strange casting for you take a public school boy and make him into a butcher's boy, but Americans don't know one class of accent from another, and so they didn't care about that. And so Sam Wood, who was the director, said, "Yeah, well, let's just get him and don't let him have a haircut." So after a few weeks, the call came, and I only had 2 lines actually, but I think I had about 3 days on it because Sam Wood was one of those meticulous directors. He never told you what to do. He just said go again, and every setup was 27 takes.
Good Lord.
That was with Robert Donat. He was a lovely, lovely man.
I was going to come to that actually because you must have. To some extent got to know him even through that, but presumably you also knew some of these early luminaries as well. Let's talk Donat started his career here at Cambridge.
Of course he did, yes.
At the festival.
I got to know him because I sat in his chair.
Oh, did you?
Which was a mistake. But it didn't have his name on the front of it, his name on the back of it. And I sat on the front of it, obviously.
Yeah, go on.
And it was pointed out to me rather quickly that this is where Mr. Donat sits. But he was very sweet. He was a nice man, and did his level best to make you feel at home.
Did he? What about, just while we're sort of in that area and before we proceed further, what other people of that ilk at that time did you come across? Did you meet people that you remember?
Well, I suppose I met an awful lot of actors, and there was. I suppose I met Noel Coward.
You met Noel Coward?
Yes.
Okay, let's stop there for a minute then.
I think I met him. My mum used to. His mum was quite rich at the time, and we used to go to some rather swell restaurants, including the Ivy. And he had his sort of regular table, just as you get in on the left there, so you'd be seen by everybody as they went in.
Yeah. What was he like?
Oh, it was a very brief encounter. It seemed to be quite charming, actually. He wasn't mad about my mum, actually. She failed to get into the lead in Bittersweet, so it went to Evelyn Leigh. He never used her, actually. Right. It was perfectly charming, but I don't think he appreciated her sort of talent, really.
Was he, looking back and with hindsight and with your own experience now, was he as good as he is, to put it crudely, cracked up to be?
I think he's one of the greatest lyric writers we've ever had.
Right.
First point, he writes wonderful songs. I think there's little doubt he was a bit of a genius,
Right.
And he was a good actor, a marvellous personality. And I don't think you can better him, really.
Right. So let's creep slowly towards 1939, the beginning of the war.
Well, not much had happened, really. I think just before that, I managed to get a rather good broadcast with the BBC at Broadcasting House, and in those days the announcer actually did wear a dinner jacket, and of course they were all live, and Charlie Shadwell directed the orchestra, and I think I was the youngest sort of singing juvenile the BBC had ever had, and we did that twice, because they didn't record repeats in those days.
No.
You just did it again, and that was a lovely experience actually at St George's Hall. I'd just got a job just after the war started, actually, in a new musical called Let's Face It, which became it became Let's Face It. It was called While the Cat's Away first, and that was it was going to be quite an important part. But unfortunately, not long after I got the job, they shut the theatres because the Blitz started, and then I went out to Bangor, actually, where the BBC Light Entertainment part was hanging out, and did a show up there for Ronnie Woolman, and I think an awful lot of people that one knew as household names then were up there doing little shows in this tiny little place, Bangor, in church halls, and we lived in pubs and all the rest of it. That was a lovely experience. I only did one show there, and then I was called up.
So let's talk about the war service. Where did you kick off?
I was to kick off in Blandford in the Royal Artillery. And I think we did about 6 weeks sort of basic training there. And then I went all over the damn place, really. A lot of it was at Buxton, where I learnt how to operate a 40mm machine gun, well, an anti-aircraft gun, really. We had a ridiculous way of training, actually. I think I believe they do it in when you become an advanced driver. Everybody had to sort of shout out what they were doing at the time.
Yeah.
And of course, since there were 9 people on the crew, it was absolute cacophony. And I don't know if we got any benefit out of it, because we weren't told what to say. We just
kept shouting.
We just did it, you know. And he says, "Oh, well, I'm loading this bloody great lever here into this bloody great hole."
That's right. Yeah,
and that's about what they got, but rather loud.
Okay, you were commissioned, I think. Was that eventually?
Yes. I was there. I went to North Africa, actually, in the ranks. As a bombardier, which is the same as a corporal, and I was in the ranks for a couple of years, 2.5 years, and then I got commissioned and into the Dorsets. I spent quite a time up here in Norfolk, actually, in Norwich, in the barracks there. It was a very grand thing. I was the youngest officer, the newest officer on Christmas Day, the day I arrived, virtually, so I was the duty officer.
I was going to say, you'd have been duty officer, that's right, Tom, yeah.
And I went to Sheringham, and I had to I was a short time in a slit trench, and I woke up one morning covered by 7 inches of snow. That wasn't very comfortable.
No, I'm sure.
And then I went to India, and then Malaya, and I ultimately reached the rank of major, which is rather impressive, really.
Yeah, it is rather, isn't it, when you think about it? Still, I hadn't thought about it. I should have saluted.
I was out by the time I was 23, so I was doing quite well, really.
Absolutely, yeah, quite. I was just trying to think, while you were going along all them places, I was just trying to count the medals. So it must be 4 or 5 medals, 5, 6 medals, I see.
I think there are, really. I've never actually sort of assembled them all, really.
There'll be a fair few anyway, no question
not bad. I very narrowly missed a lot of them. It's rather sad, really.
Oh, well, good Lord of me, it's disgrace.
You had to be a certain length of time in service.
3/4 of an hour in.
Oh, yes. I only made 25 minutes.
That's right. Yeah, right. Okay, so your DIMOB comes along. You're kicked out. What happened then?
Well, I got a bit of a grant to learn to study singing, which is very useful, really, because it kept the wool from the door. My father had died, left me just enough money to survive, and so one just beetled around, really, just trying to get a job, really, as an actor. And I decided to work very hard on auditions. And I got quite a good audition going, because I didn't like them. They're horrible things to do, you know. You sort of get on a big empty stage there and hand your music in and do your number. And, it's not a very nice experience. And therefore, I got rather good at that with a sort of piece of dialogue. And I moved furniture about and moved around and that sort of thing. And I usually worked out as one job, one audition. So I went into musicals. The first one I went into was at the Savile Theatre, a tiny, minute part understudying Jerry Verno, a thing called Belinda Fair. It flopped, actually, but we did it, before that we did a tour of West End theatres, because as soon as they fell below the minimal amount of money that you're allowed to survive in one theatre, we used to sort of go into another one.
Yeah.
Well, that was good fun.
Were you ever in the position of, in apostrophe commas, starving in any garrets?
No, I never did. I was very broke, but I was never poor, if you know what I mean. There are two subtle differences. But no, I didn't do any starving.
What about at this time? Who were your peers in this struggle for early work? I mean, were you involved with other people that we might know?
Well, I think most of them have popped off now since I'm so ancient. But I think my one person that I admired enormously was Bobby Howes,
right,
who was a lovely artist and a nice little singer and a light comedian. And I wanted to be him. That was my idea, really.
Right.
Unfortunately, I went to see a show called Oklahoma, and Howard Keel leapt over the fence there and said, "Oh, what a beautiful morning," and this wonderful, huge voice of his, and he was 6 foot, God knows what. And I thought, well, I'm barking up the wrong tree.
Flogging a dead horse, you might say. It's interesting, actually. There's quite an interesting story about that. When I actually did Reflections, one of the earlier guests I did was Edmund Hockeridge,
yes,
who, of course, was a similar ilk,
yes,
and equally disgustingly good looking.
Yes,
and
a huge voice, too.
and a wonderful voice,
yeah.
and incidentally lives quite close to here.
Yeah.
I went up to do this interview, and it was a glorious, beautiful day. And so we took the radio car, and I took her, who must be obeyed, with me. And we wandered into the garden, and he came out behind, and he put his hands on her shoulders and sang this to her, and she said, "I nearly melted." So I know what you mean. Okay, there was, I think, a period in Hollywood as well. Why and how and where and when?
No, I never actually got to Hollywood in those days. I had.
It was later, was it?
Yes, I had my passport on September the. I had my passage booked to go there and join my father on September the 9th.
Oh, right.
On September the 3rd, the damn war broke out, and so there was I never got away.
Right.
And I never actually went there until a later time, actually, when they wanted to do a pilot of Dad's Army, believe it or not, which is a very stupid thing to do, because it was not an American story, really.
No.
And it was called the Rear Guard, it was called.
Right.
And Mannering was a Jewish tailor. And it was unfortunately, I don't have the tape anymore, but it was a music show. They did the submarine commando episode.
I know what you mean.
And it was very good, but I say it was just a stupid idea to do it, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, how into television? Talk us through that.
Television, well, I started writing for television, mostly under the tutelage of Bill Lawrenshaw and Michael Mills at the BBC. And I was then, at that time, writing songs, really, writing the lyrics. And when we had a show on a Saturday or something like that, and there was a visiting star, you called for special material. Or if it was boat race day or something like that, you write a boat race song. And so I was in much demand, actually, and I did practically every Saturday show there was. And that got the introduction to television. I appeared in it as an actor as well, but not very often. That was in Alexander Palace days, when in the days when the image was upside down. The cameraman used to focus on a little ground glass screen, and it was upside down. And so how they worked out whether to turn right or turn left, I never understood. And it was very, very crude equipment, but it was very exciting. And it was absolutely live. There was no question of stopping or anything like that. No. You just had to go from one set to another. But you just sort of get into it a bit at a time, really.
Yeah.
And I was around and always willing to do anything that was going, and it gradually escalated.
As opposed to ordinary script writing, which we may come to in a while, when you write songs, if you write lyrics and words and what do you write first? What
well, in our case, it was always the words first.
Right.
Cyril was my partner, Cyril Lauderdale. He was conducting many of the shows in the West End. And he was doing Kismet and Call Me Madam and all, My Fair Lady, all these sort of shows. And so he would be rather tired in the morning, actually, particularly since he was up to other things as well. And he would... I would arrive at about 8:30 in the morning, wake him up, and he'd sort of bleary-eyed sit at the piano and say, "How does it go?" And I would sort of sing him not the tune, but the rhythm pattern. You know?
Yes, I know.
And you've got to have an interesting rhythm pattern if you've got to be a songwriter. It's no good writing doggerel, the same pattern all the time. But then we worked terribly well. We had a marvellous time, a lot of laughs. Yeah. And we worked together for about 5 years, really.
Yes, indeed, because of course he appeared on the Live programme, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
He closed the Live programme.
Yes, he
did. Came in at the end there.
Yes.
And of course wrote the Portrait of My Love on this
song.
It's beautiful. One of the best he did, I think.
Yeah.
No question about it at all.
I managed to change his mind about the title there, because he was going to call it Portrait of Deirdre.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. But I thought, it's only about, it probably might be 10,000 Deirdres in the country, and they'll like it, but nobody else will.
What a good idea. What a good idea. It's funny, actually, you should say that, because I wrote a bit of a ditty And I put a girl's name to it, and I said to a friend of mine the other day, I said, well, why don't you put words to this? And he said, because you've made the title a girl's name. And he said, it's too difficult. He said, if you change the title, I'll put words to it. It never occurred to me at that time.
Yes, well, of course, on that same record, there's Joanna, you know.
Yeah.
And it was a very good number, and, you know, it went fine. But I think it would have been better had it been a sort of more general thing, really.
Yeah, yes, quite. Okay, let's just move forward a little bit and move towards the things that perhaps many of the listeners will, as it were, recognise you rather more quickly for.
Yeah.
Tell us first of all how you. Well, let's start here and say, how did you meet Jimmy Perry?
Jimmy was one of my wife was an agent, a theatrical agent, and Jimmy was one of the clients. I was doing a show called, oh God knows what it was called. It was Reg Varney, and I wanted an actor who was...
Beggar My Neighbour, was it?
Beggar My Neighbour, how marvellous, thank you.
Right.
And Reg Varney had to have a very flamboyant, noisy brother. And Anne said, well, I think I've got just the man for the job. It's Jimmy Perry. You better come round to Watford and see him. So I went down to Watford, where he was in shows there. Sort of, well, he ran Watford for about 9 years in repertory. And he was ideal for it, actually. And so he played this insufferable brother, and very good he was, too. And while he was doing that... He rang my wife up and said, look, I've got this idea for a situation comedy. Do you think I could show it to David? She said, yeah, go ahead and show it to him. So he came up with the script called The Fighting Tigers. And I read it and I liked it. And I took it to Michael Mills, who was the then head of comedy and was a marvellous man, actually. He was a great enthusiast, and anything was possible. And he said, oh, I think you should, in the first place, you should call it Dad's Army. Mm-hmm. And in the second place, you better get together, because Jimmy's not an experienced television writer.
Right.
And, you work together on it. And so we did.
So, and the early ones were in the ones that we're watching now. Aside from being in black and white, I don't think they've ever been repeated, have they?
No, they haven't. We used to repeat things within a year the first time, and that's how shows got popular. They don't repeat things anymore. But they were never seen for 30 years, actually, since they were shown.
No, quite.
And they come up very fresh. I'm enjoying them very much. I don't remember that well. You know, I've got a rotten memory for that sort of thing anyway. Can't remember the name of shows. Like Beggar My Neighbour.
That's quite like Beggar My Neighbour. Well, there were two of us here, so two a bit better than one, perhaps. Yeah. Okay, let's move a little bit further. We shall probably come back to Dad's Army. I'm sure we shall. So we know now how you met Jimmy. So how did you meet another of your sparring partners, Jeremy Lloyd? How did you come across him?
I suppose I had vaguely known Jeremy because he was a known writer around about the place, and I think I encountered him once or twice. But I remember the first proper meeting actually was when he was at Nice Airport, when he was coming off with Joanna Lumley on his come off the plane on his honeymoon, and shortly after that, actually, we collaborated on a show called It's Awfully Bad for Your Eyes, Darling, by Judy Cooper. And I've been called upon by Bill Cotton to go down there. It's terrible. It's in a dreadful state. See if he can sort of funny it up a bit. So Jeremy was in it. And so I went and had a look at this thing. And I said, well, I don't want to get involved writing. But I used to talk to Jeremy about it. And I said, you do the writing. And so... we collaborated on that, and at least we made the first minute and a half. You could hear the fact there was an audience there, and so it sort of improved it slightly. But it was not a happy show, and not a happy thing to do, really.
No. Now, as Dad's Army came along as a result of this idea of Jimmy's and the fact that nobody had done Dad's Army, that kind of thing before, and I think there was also a sort of a reason for you being served. It was Jeremy's service in where?
Yeah, Jeremy. He worked in Simpsons actually, which sadly is about to close.
Indeed.
And he had written this show mostly in Gentlemen's Outfitters actually, and. He told me about it, and I liked the idea very much. And he already sold it actually to one of the commercial companies. And said, "Well, if you can get it back, I'd like to try and progress it. So I thought it would be better if we had the ladies' department as well as the gentlemen's department, and they were sort of squashing in on the same area, so there was the conflict all the time.
Yeah.
And so we did a pilot for the BBC of the first show, and it went very well. And so we swiftly did a series. The BBC was always rather ashamed of it, really, because it was a bit common. It was a bit carry on, and they were rather more for the sort of esoteric type of comedy, and I think probably a more middle class sort of all sit on the sofa and have a gin and tonic type thing. But the public liked it, and there's no doubt about it. It went terribly well, and of course it's done marvellously recently.
Let's move back for a minute to Dad's Army if we can, because obviously people will want to know particularly probably about that, and quite justifiably so. Where did you film it for a start?
Well, up this way, really, mostly in Thetford on the battle area, Stamford battle area, and various parts of the country round about there, because it's very good, Norfolk. It's nobody bothers you very much. They don't spend all their time coming up to you and say, can I have your autograph? And they got used to us. The battle area was marvellous because we could blow things up and do all naughty things that the public didn't have access, and so it was absolutely ideal for filming.
Let's just run one or two of the stars of that by you. Arthur Lowe, Ian Lavender, John Le Mesurier, Clive Dunn, Harold Bennett, indeed. These people, talk to us about him. I mean, talk to us about Arthur.
Arthur was marvellous. He's a lovely man. He was very, very, very much like Mannering, really, and grew more. We made the part more and more towards Arthur as the time went on, and the two characters emerged. He was a great pro, really. If he didn't like something, if you drove him into a corner, he was absolutely unmovable.
Oh, right.
He had a great thing about his trousers. He never wanted to take his trousers off. I don't blame him, actually. But I mean, ultimately, Jimmy, who was always rather enthusiastic about the ideas that we'd had, went along to tell him about the movie that we were going to do. But they were all going to get their uniforms. They were sort of. They were marching along, and one by one all their civilian clothes would disappear.
Yes.
And they'd be walking along in their long johns. So, I mean, the things gone recently.
Yes.
And then bit by bit they get their uniform. Arthur heard about this. We thought it was a marvellous idea, and it was a very funny bit. But Arthur had it in his contract that he wouldn't have to take his trousers off.
Good Lord, incredible.
And also the episode where the bomb is put down Jones's trousers. Arthur didn't like this idea at all, and he saved his objections actually till the morning of filming, and said, "I'm not going to do this. I'm just think it's not funny. I'll have it in my stomach, but not down the trousers." Well, it isn't funny around the stomach actually. So we were rather ready for this because a rumour had got round that Arthur wasn't happy. So Jimmy and I got together the night before, and we sort of worked out a plan of action. And so we switched the whole thing very quickly and the dialogue with it, and had it for Jones. And it was, of course, it's a hilarious bit. And
yes.
Arthur, I think, was rather regretted that he'd made that stand. But anyway, that's how it was, and I'm very glad. It was very funny.
We moved to another man with local connections, John Le Mesurier, Bury St Edmunds, I think, firm of lawyers, I think his family were solicitors or barristers.
I think he was, yes. So he's marvellous pro was John. He was always in rehearsal 20 minutes before the proper time. He always knew his part. He was a complete professional, really. He had a photographic memory, I think, because if he couldn't remember a line, he'd say, no, don't tell me, but it's over the pages at the top there. It's 3 lines down. You know, he could see the whole page, the whole script. It was funny, really.
Yeah, quite. There is just, before we, actually, it just occurred to me something else about the question of Arthur Lowe and scripts.
Yeah, well, it's a famous story, actually. Arthur Lowe, at the end of the rehearsal, would take his script, open the drawer in the desk that he was working at in the rehearsal room, and stick the script there and shut it, and go off without it, you see. And the cast got a bit fed up with this, because they all arrived knowing the thing, having worked on it the night before, and they rang up and said, "No, can't you have a word with Arthur and sort of get him to learn the damn thing?" So I think one tried, really, but he refused to have said, "Oh, I won't take a thing like that script back with me. I won't have that, not in my home."
Incredible.
And I actually sent 2 scripts to him. I said that he could have one in the drawer, and perhaps he could put the other one under the pillow, so that some of it might percolate during the night. And that didn't get much reaction from him, except that he said to Jimmy, "David's getting rather crabby these days, isn't he?"
Quite. What about Clive Dunn?
Clive
Not as daft as he appears.
Oh no, not as daft
by
as he
any
appears,
means.
but he was he could be very spontaneously very funny. You don't require actors actually to invent stuff, but it is nice if they can embellish what you write. And he was very good at that. Unfortunately, he could never do it twice. He'd always forget what he'd done. So, short of having a shorthand typist standing by rehearsals all the time, we sometimes lost some of his best improvisations, really. Mm-hmm. But he's good fun.
One that I always liked to see, perhaps not everybody's favourite, but he's one of mine, was Harold Bennett.
Yes, he was marvellous. I first saw Harold I saw him in pantomime. It was a sort of pantomime called the Rose and the Ring, I think it was called, at Stratford in the East, And he was terminally old then. I rang up Jerry, who ran Jerry's club, and was Billy Bunter, and he was in it as well. And I said, "Look, he looks very old. Can he learn his part?" He said, "Oh yes, he's all right. He's all there, And before he came to me, I was doubtful about his ability to sort of stand up, but he was a wonderful timing, and he was a perfect in all the years I used him. Yeah. Marvellous man.
Perhaps one of the most unlikely ones, one might say, especially if you have regard for his previous career, perhaps was John Laurie.
Oh yes, because John Laurie was a very distinguished actor, and he would tell you so too. He said I was the finest Hamlet ever was. I can't imagine him as Hamlet, but apparently he said he was very good. But he'd made endless movies and had an enormous experience. So, and Fraser wasn't a very big part.
No.
In fact, on occasion, when he wasn't very well served by us, I think he said, he arrived one morning and said, "Do you think you need me here? I could phone it in."
Phone it in.
And he was very meticulous. He'd say, "The trouble with you two boys is you're damn well illiterate."
What about dear Arnold Ridley?
Arnold Ridley, well, he was super. He was also a very distinguished pro, and he directed movies and those sort of things, and produced them. And he'd written, I think, 30 plays altogether. So he was a very distinguished operator in theatre. He got a bit chuntry, he's getting on when we got him, and he used to sort of walk up and down filming and chuntering and say, "Tell him to get on with it.
David, can you remember the Blackpool trip when you put the lights on?
Yes, I can. Yes, we were called on to go up there. It was many do actually. We all assembled at the station and got on this rather nice reserved coach. We went up there. We were met in Rolls Royces or the equivalent, and feted and given sandwiches and lunch, and it was raining like hell actually. When we went out to see, there were an enormous number of people assembled to see the opening of switching on the lights. Yeah. But all we could see was umbrellas actually. And anyway, we did this and switched them on. And it's very funny because as soon as we'd finished that, nobody wanted to know about us as far as the entertainment was concerned. Oh. And we got in a car. It would take us back to our digs, as it were. And the strike went on, and John LeMessurier said, "I'm not getting out of this car until you've taken me to a nightclub." So we all arrived at this nightclub and so spent the evening there. It was very funny because there were little sort of low, beside the seats, there were little sort of low divisions in between the tables. Yeah. And on top of those was little tiny sort of hedges about 4 or 5 inches high. And I think John wanted to get up and sort of spend a penny, and he said, "Oh God, suddenly it's the Grand National."
Let's move now to Heidi High. How was it conceived, first of all?
Well, Heidi High was... we wrote that when we were doing after we did It Ain't Half Hot, Mum. Jimmy was a redcoat at Butlins in the holidays when he was at RADA. And I used to go during the summer season and produce the shows there. We never met at all, but we all went to the same camps. I went to Clacton and Bethely and Filey, and used to put on these pretty disastrous shows actually in these concrete theatres. And so between us, we really knew the holiday camp scene.
Yeah.
We didn't want to make it. There was a lot of opposition, actually, to doing a show about holiday camps because there had been several attempts and they hadn't worked. Largely because the sort of standpoint of the various programmes that went on was that these were terrible places, and the barbed wire was there to keep people in, not people out. In point of fact, I mean, the campers had a marvellous time. They thoroughly enjoyed themselves. You could go there and you unload the kids, and Mum, there was no self-catering in those days. That you got a meal served in the dining room, and everybody had a marvellous time. And so we emphasised that aspect of it, and it was very successful straight away.
Two people who come straight to mind when we're talking about Heidi High, without any doubt at all, and I mentioned these two because there is an interest in the way you came up against or came up to them, as it were, and that of course was Paul Shane and Sue Pollard. How did you get Paul?
I think we were looking for the right sort of person to play Ted Bobies, and we'd toyed with the idea of several actors, and then I think Jim saw Paul in an episode of Coronation Street, and he said that I think this is the boat we ought to have, and he came to see us and he read it he was a marvellous comedian actually, because I think for 5 years before that he'd won the award as being the best club comic in the North, and so we were on very safe grounds there, and he was able to take that part and in both hands and really deliver something. And there was no doubt about it. He was. It suited him marvellously.
I don't know whether
he's also a very good actor.
I was going to say I don't know whether the news ever filtered back to you just how petrified he was at the beginning. Did you know that?
Well, everyone's petrified.
Yeah, well, he certainly was.
He concealed it very well.
Yeah, quite. Now, I think Sue, did she not arrive at Jimmy's or something? Yes,
she did. And Jimmy had, and he still lives in his flat right at the top of the
no lift.
Yeah, have you ever been there?
Yes, but not again.
Well, I couldn't go there now because they're up 85 steps, and I don't think my heart would stand out. It would hold out. But she plodded to the top of these steps. And arrived breathless at the top. She was a very eccentric dresser in those days, and she still is. The difference was that I think in those days she dressed at Oxfam. Now she goes to sort of couturier places and get some pretty good gear, and she looks marvellous. But she arrived, and she never stopped talking, of course.
No.
But she's a marvellous personality, and when she left us breathless after about 20 minutes and plodded down the stairs, I said to Jim, well, she's Cinderella and she never goes to the ball.
Yeah,
that's how it was.
What a good idea. Yeah, and that's how it was.
Yeah.
It's interesting, actually. You should talk about her manner. The first time I met her, because of course we both come from the same city, as you know, and the first time I met her parents. They came to my wife and I, and we were introduced. And I said to her father, I said, "You must be very proud." And he said, "Well," he said, "we are." But he said, "I don't know where she gets it from because her sister's not a bit like that."
Well, it's quite true. Her sister's not a bit like that, and she's a very retiring and very beautiful girl.
Yeah,
actually.
she is.
I mean, not that Sue isn't a beautiful girl, but she's very different.
We've got, sadly, and I really mean sadly, about 9 minutes left. I could do in 9 hours. Let's talk about you then. You married when and to whom?
Oh, God, I'm terrible at dates. We've been married about 40-odd years. More than that,
No,
actually.
40. I was going to say it's more than 40.
Yes, more than 40, but somewhere between 40 and not quite 45.
Right.
And we met, I met Anne at, when we were rehearsing for the Belle of New York. Some terrible rehearsal rooms called Max. It's no jump. And we all sat round in the looking at each other in that corner, and she thought I was had been engaged as one of the singers, sort of thing, one of the chorus singers. So she came over and sort of, why don't you join us, sort of thing. And she was a bit surprised when she found out I was playing the lead. But we got together then, and it's been a very happy association.
How many children?
7.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what do they all do with themselves now?
Well, my daughter actually is the principal one in show business. She's in Hollywood at the moment. I think she's got something going for her with Warner Brothers. It's really quite exciting. But it's it's quite difficult being a writer these days. And although she's had one very successful series, she can't get arrested with some of the other stuff that she's written, and very good it is too. But there's an awful disease in the BBC at the moment. They won't make up their minds about anything.
So with a family that size, how close are you all?
Very close. We live roughly in the same part of the world, actually, between Stowmarket and Bury St Edmunds, and we see each other very frequently, really.
Yeah.
In fact, they're all, most of them assembling at my place this evening and going to a little cottage I've got in Brancaster to look around, because I haven't had it long. And yes, we're very, very close, really.
It's interesting, in view of something that I will bring up in a minute that came up at This Is Your Life programme. 7 children take a lot of bringing up. I know, because I brought 2 up, and that takes a lot of doing. So your view, what are your views on upbringing? I mean, if you know what I'm implying.
Well,
were you a strict dad, or what, or how, or?
I think all the credit for the way my children are brought up really must go to my wife.
Right.
I was simply the one that said, "You wait till your father gets home." Hopefully, by the time I got home, they're in bed anyway. But I think all you can say about me is that I was very consistent. Whatever I did, and they seemed to like me.
Well, yeah, I was actually going to say I might as well chuck this in for what it's worth while we've got a second. When the live programme came, which I was of course privileged to be a small part of, it's quite interesting that that the youngest boy came up to us in the room afterwards and said, "We've just been talking over there," he said, "and he said, we didn't realise until tonight how special our dad was."
No.
And I thought that was lovely.
Very sweet.
That he should have said that.
Yeah.
And,
he's a bit of a computer expert now.
Is he? Can he be here tomorrow? Because mine broke this afternoon. So we've got it broken. Okay. How do you cope with recognition? Do you enjoy it? I mean, I know that as a writer rather more than actor, perhaps it's not so much.
I
do you
love
like
it. I've kept a very low profile as far as personal appearances are concerned, and also for publicity, because when your name appears on the captions as often as mine does, you don't want to necessarily arouse a jealousy amongst your fellow workers,
Right.
So I've always kept a fairly low profile, really. But I'm wonderfully acknowledged now, and it's very, very enjoyable and very, very. It's beautiful.
But you do bits and... I'm not going to say exactly where you live, but I mean, you do a fair amount over there. You're quite highly thought of in that area for doing bits and pieces, aren't you? As it were, pushing the boat out, you might say.
Well, yes.
Locally, and quite well thought of there. If you... in this career, which is almost legendary, one that most people would kill to have a quarter of, maybe, you could say, what has been the lowest spot and the highest, do you think?
Well, I suppose the lowest spot was when I started, because it's been a wonderful climb, really. I've sort of... it's got better and better as time has gone by, and there haven't been any low spots. Once I got going, I think there was a time when I couldn't get very far, and actually I remember my wife and I sitting up in bed and reading the Times and looking at the advertisements, and she went through the situations very compared with my qualifications. She said, "Well, you can't do anything, can you?"
Sounds like someone else I know. What about the pinnacle then?
Well, it's it's really great. I think it's better now than it's ever been, really. It's lovely to see these old shows so appreciated, because they're funny, and they compare so favourably with what's going on mostly at the moment. and it's very gratifying, really, very gratifying.
How did you come to terms with if you have, with the tragedy of Simon, your son-in-law?
Well, yes, it was a great tragedy, because not only was he my son-in-law, he was my great mate.
Yeah.
And we used to have endless dinners and high and he was a beautiful fellow.
So, the rest of the family, I mean, from what I remember of it, rallied round very quickly.
Oh yes, yes.
And
Well, they're all marvellous. There's a great backup when anything like that happens.
Yeah, yes, quite.
And he's sadly missed, and a very distinguished actor.
Yeah, yeah. I think it likely, probably, that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's not for me to say. I don't know. Would he have made? Would he have made the same contribution? Do you think in his fuller life? To his profession, maybe as you made to yours?
Oh, I think so. I think he would undoubtedly become one of our theatrical knights, because he was very versatile and very dedicated, and his most interesting approach to the business. You know, he's the complete professional. He's a fascinating man, really.
What's left? What would you like to do if you could do one more thing that you've not done yet? What would you like to do? Anything? Is there anything left? Have you done it all? Have you been there, done that, or not?
I think I've been there, done that, really. I regret that I never did a successful musical, but it wasn't for want of trying.
All right, a 3-word question. Have you retired?
Well, sort of. 3-word answer. I was born in